Did you know 90% of students make a grammar mistake in the first few answers of their IELTS speaking test? So how do you use correct grammar in IELTS speaking? Let's find out. Hello, it's Keith from the Keith Speaking Academy. You know, many students have asked me that question, right? What tense should I use for different questions in IELTS speaking? In fact, I got asked so many times, I made a whole course to show students for different parts of the test what grammar they can use, my Fluent Grammar in IELTS Speaking course. But the short answer to that question is that there is no correct tense for any particular answer. There are different possibilities. It depends what you want to say, right? That said, generally speaking, there are 3 different types of situation that require different kinds of grammar that you should focus on and master. And they are, first, talking about the present time. Second, talking about the past. And third, talking about the future. So in this video, I'm going to show you the different tenses you can use for each of these situations with examples, right, that you can use in your answers for IELTS speaking. At the end of the video, I'll show you a very simple way to activate this grammar, right, to make sure you're not just learning it, but that you can use it so that you avoid mistakes like this. Present simple. First person, third person with S. I go, you go, he goes. Okay. Example, I go to school every day. My brother, he go to school every day too. Simple. I'll tell you that at the end of the video. And do remember, right, that these are not tenses that you must use. These are tenses that you can use, right? They are appropriate. But really always remember to be flexible depending on what you want to say. Okay, let's get going. Okay, number 1, talking about the present time, right? Where you live, what you do, how often you do it. All of this, the now, be here now. This is super simple because you can talk about the present time with any tense that has the word present in it. Present simple, present continuous, present perfect simple, present perfect continuous. All of these are fine. Let's look at an example. Imagine you are asked, where do you live? You could say, well, I live in Spain, right? That's my state now, present simple. I live in Spain. You could also say, I'm living in Spain, present continuous, okay? The difference here is I'm living in Spain sounds more temporary. It's not as permanent as I live in Spain. I'm living in Spain at the moment, but maybe I'll move. Slight difference. You could also say, I've lived in Spain for 5 years. Present perfect simple, right? And this is, I arrived in the past and I'm still here now. I've lived in Spain for 5 years. In addition, I could say, I've been living in Spain for 5 years. Present perfect continuous. I arrived in the past. I'm still here now. I've been living in Spain for 5 years. The difference here with the continuous tenses is the focus is always more on the doing, the activity. I've been living in here. I've been living in Spain for 5 years. My image that I create, I can almost see the person living there, going to work, waking up, living their life. That's the focus. Whereas I've lived in Spain for 5 years, the focus is more on the 5 years, right? That's how long I've been here. But all of these tenses can be used in different ways to answer the question, where do you live now? Right? Where do you live? Right. Leave me a note down in the comments. And here's a tip. Do you remember I talked about activating the grammar, right? So it goes from here to here. One tip to do that is when you're practicing different tenses, maybe talking about where you live or where you work or what hobbies you do, right? Practice them making sentences which are true for you. Very often students practice with the example in the book, right? Emily lives in Paris. That's Emily. What about you? Oh, I live in Spain. My brother lives in Manchester. Make sentences which are true for you, and that kind of, it's like an anchor that makes the learning deeper and helps you activate the grammar. That's my little tip. There is more coming. Let's move on to the next bit. Okay, number 2, talking about past time. Now, this could be when you were young or younger, when you were a child, when you were at school, when you were at university, and so on. Maybe last year or last month or even yesterday, any point behind you in past time. Again, here you could use tenses with the word past, past simple, past continuous, past perfect. You can also use used to and would. Let me just go through each of those with some simple examples. In IELTS Speaking Part 1, you may get questions about your childhood, when you were at school. In Part 2, you may be asked to talk about a previous job, a film you saw in the past, or a previous holiday, something in the past, okay? Earlier, I said I live in Spain, right? Imagine the examiner asked me, have you always lived in Spain? No, I lived in Manchester when I was younger. So I'm using the simple past or the past simple. I lived in Manchester when I was younger, right? When looking, for example, when you're telling a story in the past, we often use the past continuous, especially when two events happen at the same time, if they're overlapping. So I might say, for example, talking about a story when I met a special person, I was living in Manchester when I first met my girlfriend. Past continuous. I was living in Manchester, right? Continuous action. When I met my girlfriend. Second action at the same time, that overlapping. Past continuous then, we often use kind of as a background to a story or an introduction to a story. For example, right? I was working late one night last week when my colleague asked me if I wanted to go for dinner. I was working late, past continuous, when a colleague asked me, simple past. So those two are often used together when giving a background or an introduction to a story. Great for a part 2 question, right? Now, a third tense to talk about the past is the past perfect. This is a challenging tense. It causes a lot of problems for students. The truth is, here's the good news, is we don't use it very much in English, really. But let me show you how to use it. Do you remember earlier I was talking about when I met a special person and I said, I was living in Manchester when I met my girlfriend. Okay, that's the past continuous and the simple past. But I could also say, I was living in Manchester when I met my girlfriend. I had moved to Manchester 2 years earlier. So I had moved to Manchester 2 years earlier. It's the past perfect. And I'm using this to talk about a reason or explain why something happened in the past. I'm describing the past event of meeting my girlfriend, but I want to explain some extra information or why that happened. So I use the past perfect to talk about an activity that happened before that, right? I was living in Manchester, met my girlfriend, but 2 years before I had moved to Manchester. And that explains why I was in Manchester. Okay, we can use the past perfect for this. When talking about the past, we can also use used to. Now, this is used with a D, but it's pronounced used to, right? You don't really pronounce the D. It connects with the T. Used to, used to. And this is for an activity in the past, but no longer exists or doesn't carry on now, right? It's finished. Done. Stop. I used to live in Manchester, right? That's in the past. I don't now, because you know I live in Spain. So I used to live in Manchester. We can use that. It's easy to remember because just remember that usually is in the present and used to is in the past. When you're writing, just remember to write the D, used to. The other way of talking about the past, and this is more for habits in the past, is we say would. Would. When I lived in Manchester, I would catch the bus every day to school. Right? I caught the bus every day to school. It's the same, but I would catch the bus emphasizes this habit, the repeated action. When I lived in Manchester, I would catch the bus to school every day. You could use a contraction. I'd catch the bus to school every day. That's it. These are all different ways we can talk about things in the past. And here's another little tip for you. Do you remember I talked about activating the grammar? So it's not here, but it's being spoken by you. So another tip is when you're practicing sentences to just change one word in the sentence. So I said, I used to live in Manchester. I can change Manchester, right? I used to live in the outskirts of Manchester. I used to live in a big house in Manchester. Or I used to work in Manchester. I used to go shopping in Manchester. So each time I'm just changing one word or a part of the sentence in order to practice and practice and practice. And just by changing one word, you can focus on the grammar. And all of this is helping you activate your spoken grammar. Let's move on. Okay, number 3 is talking about the future time. Maybe next week, next month, your future career, your future job, wife, family, husband, who knows, right? Here, this often comes up in part 1, right? Will you change your job in the future? It often comes up in part 3, talking about maybe comparing the past and the future, predicting things in the future. There are different ways we can express the future. The most common are the future with will, the future with going to, present continuous for the future, and also might or could for possible futures, right? So let's take an example. The first one, the examiner might say, will you change your job in the future? Now, will, we often use for 2 things. Either when we decide something right now, right? Will you change your job in the future? Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I think I will carry on with the same job, right? I'm almost deciding right now. I've never decided. I think I will carry on, right? So when you decide something now, also when you're predicting the future, right? You're not sure, but you're predicting the future. My job's not great, but I think it will get better. I think it will get better. I'm kind of guessing the future, so I use will. Okay. Now we can also use going to, but the difference here is that going to is usually for something we've planned, already decided. So if the examiner says, will you change your job in future? If I've already made a plan, I might say, no, actually, I'm not going to change my job in future. I'm going to carry on in this job for the next 2 years. I'm expressing something I've decided and a plan that I have with going to. A third possibility is the present continuous for the future. Normally, again, this is something planned and in your schedule. So you've decided, you've planned it, and it's already in your diary or in your schedule, usually. So again, the examiner might say, will you change your job in the future? Actually, yes, I'm starting a new job on Monday. I am starting a new job. Present continuous for that future planned activity. Now, finally, if we want to talk about possibility, right? The same question about changing your job. You could say, well, it is possible I will change my job. But actually, a much more natural way for us is to use might or may or could. So answering the same question, will you change your job? Well, I might change my job if I can find a better one. I may change my job if I can find a better one. Okay. So what's really interesting, right, is that for that one question, the same question, will you change your job? I can answer using here 4 different tenses or 4 different grammatical ways, depending on the reality of my situation and how I want to communicate my idea. Okay. Got it? Great. Now, my final tip for you is when you're learning grammar, not only should you be reading and maybe writing, speak it out. Make up some phrases, maybe phrases about you, changing a word or making a little story, but speak out the grammar. It's so important to get it from here out into your mouth. Imagine, though, what it might be like if, as you're speaking, I was by your side and giving you better intonation. So instead of saying, I could say, actually, in English, it would be dee, 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 dee. And you could pick up the correct intonation and the correct pronunciation. Well, that's what you get in the Fluent Grammar for IELTS Speaking course. It's not a live course with me, it's recorded videos, but it's like I'm almost in the room with you, giving you, modeling the pronunciation and the intonation for all of the different kind of tenses you may want to use for part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the IELTS speaking test. So with this course, not only are you going to improve your knowledge of grammar, but you're actually activating it, automating it, so you can almost speak it out naturally and correctly, making fewer mistakes, building your confidence so you can face the examiner with confidence and ace your IELTS speaking test. If you want to find out more, well, have a look at what some of my students have said about it. And finally, there is a link down below in the description. And listen, I'm going to give a coupon in the link to give you 25% off the price of this course. There are only 50 codes, so only available for 50 people. The link is down below. If you think this is going to help you, go and check it out. And you can get 25% off today. As always, you can get the PDF for this lesson. Just click in the link in the description for free, as always. Also, if you've liked this, give me a like, subscribe to the channel, English Speaking Success. And that's it. I will maybe see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.